These are the easiest snakes to confuse with a venomous one. It's the water snakes. Despite looking eerily similar to the cottonmouth, otherwise known as the water moccasin, water snakes are totally non-venomous. So today, we're going to be covering every single one of them, and teaching you how to identify them so you don't confuse them for a venomous snake. We'll be joined by Ben Zeno, my good friend and wildlife biologist, who has extensive experience with finding and identifying these snakes. And you might be asking yourself, what exactly is a water snake? Is that just any snake that can live in the water? And to put it simply, they're a group of non-venomous aquatic snakes that are all in the genus of Nerodia. Things like crawfish snakes, garter snakes, and the aforementioned water moccasins are actually not water snakes, even though they live in very similar habitats. Also, all over Europe and parts of Africa, there are some snake species that are often referred to as water snake, but they're usually some type of grass snake, or even sometimes a venomous elapid. Whole can of worms we're not getting into. Those are totally unrelated snakes, and they're not related to the ones here in the US. As we cover each water snake, we'll be ranking them in two separate ways. One is how similar they are in appearance to cottonmouths, and the other is how cool we think they are based on size and unique features. Now, this first snake you could almost consider to be a cottonmouth mimic, and it's the banded water snake. Found throughout the southeast US, and actually some introduced areas in the western US. On average, these guys grow to be about 3 feet in length. But the Florida banded water snakes, a subspecies of bandids, can actually grow upwards of 5 feet in length. They're a generalist water snake living across a variety of different habitats. But in Louisiana, I tend to find them in slower moving bodies of water, rather than rivers or stagnant ponds. Their facial patternings can look eerily similar to a moccasin, and they have that drab, oftentimes faded patterning. And to a degree, these snakes will be about the same size. One thing that I will say is that they don't tend to swim the same way. They're a lot less buoyant than cottonmouths, and like all other water snakes, they're not nearly as chunky. This is one of those snakes that I don't recommend people interact with unless they 100% know that it's a banded water snake, especially at a quick glance or when the snake is just diving into the water. It's certainly not worth the risk to try and grab one of these snakes if you haven't fully identified it. We have to talk about the big boys themselves, fasciata. We have to talk about the banded water snakes. What are your thoughts?
So banded water snakes for me are probably gonna be as low as you can get on the list for a few reasons. I feel like there's rarely like crazy exceptional banded water snakes, at least in my part of North Carolina, where when they get old, the banding tends to just kind of fade away into nothingness. So you find one and you're like, well, it's a banded, but you don't even have bands. So what's the point of your common name anyways? When they do keep their bands to adulthood, you're cruising at sunset and your headlights illuminate something and it looks like a mud snake. And you're like, yes, a 3 foot long mud snake. My night is made. And you pull up and it's a banded water snake. And there's just no other water snakes that do that. There's nothing else that gets me like bandids do when I'm looking for mud snakes. So for that reason, I think I put these guys near the bottom, if not at the very bottom of my tier list.
You can occasionally find a really stunning broad-banded water snakes. Like there's some really cool subspecies of bandids. Like you've got southern Florida bandids, which I'm sure people in Florida are just like sick of. And then as you get closer to Texas, they can look really, really cool. Like you can get some cool bandids. I think bandids are pretty basic. I mean, you can find a nice looking one, but they're going to look like a cottonmouth. The nicest banded water snake looks like a really nice cottonmouth. Yeah, they can be a tough one. So like I would put them, I mean, what would you say, 9 out of 10?
I can totally see this being the top of the list, like 9 out of 10.
Yeah, there's a lot of like medium sized of both. They're all just like 1 foot to 1.5 foot long. It's like no water snake is going to be an absolute 10 out of 10. Obviously, there's pretty decent tells that we're learning in this video, but like this gets as close as it possibly can to being that difficult to identify, I would say. Next, we have the brown water snake, and these guys live all along the southeastern Atlantic coast, down into Florida, and as far west as Alabama's Tombigbee River. They're a larger water snake for sure, maxing out very close to 6 feet in length. And they're one of what I like to call the club-headed water snakes, as they have this really odd-shaped head with their eyes higher up than the snakes that we've seen so far. I like to imagine this helps them hunt a little bit better in moving water, which is where these guys tend to live. But once again, they can be found in most water within their range. I've been bullied a lot for these snakes. It actually took me years to find one. Oh, what's up? Hello. Gotcha. We got our reporter in the field bringing you a brown water snake.
Hey, buddy. Check it out. This is not a cottonmouth. This is the brown water snake. Brown water snakes can kind of be considered our most aquatic water snakes. Now I know that might sound kind of silly at first because they're all water snakes, right? So you'd think they all live in or near the water, and it's true, but brown water snakes are spending even more time actually hunting in or underwater than our other Nerodia. You'll often see brown water snakes basking on logs or rocks near the water as opposed to foraging, because an adult brown water snake like this could eat 1 or 2 big catfish and be set for several weeks. Unfortunately, because of their aquatic habits and because of their coloration, this is a species that is extremely commonly confused for cottonmouths here on the coastal plain of North Carolina, but their patterns actually look nothing alike. Oftentimes a little bit more calm than our other Nerodia. That is a really cool snake, and that is a really special treat.
Brown water snakes are the only block-headed snakes we get. And I love brown water snakes. I think this is a really cool species that's very consistent. They're like the water snakes that do all the things that water snakes are supposed to do.
Yeah, I would say they're just like the most consistent water snakes. I think we would do well to throw these guys like right smack in the middle. Moving right along, we have the Mississippi green, or what I sometimes call the bayou or delta greens. Mississippi green snakes live all up and down the Mississippi River Delta and into the coastal marshes. They're an average-sized water snake species that's most commonly seen in great numbers after heavy tropical storms or hurricanes, where they get washed out of the marshes in great numbers with another water snake species that we'll be taking a look at later. Mississippi greens are really easy to misidentify with cottonmouths, but along coastal areas, those dingy green-colored snakes you see are usually going to be these rather than cottonmouths. They're certainly one that I'd recommend looking at body size and head structure for, and they certainly don't have all those facial markings like some water snakes or even cottonmouths. Repetition is absolutely key when it comes to snake identification, hence why I'm showing you as much video as I possibly can. The better image you have in your head about these snakes, the easier it is to identify them if you ever see one. Yeah, now I would say as far as moccasin look-alike, I don't know, what would you say are some dead giveaways for the moccasin rating?
I think something like a 6 or 7 out of 10 for similarity to cottonmouths. If you know what you're looking for, it's going to be hard to confuse, but if you don't know what you're looking for, it's easy to confuse.
Yeah, I would put them at a 6 probably, because it's still a water snake. It's still this little thing that can dart into the water and you can be like, was that a water moccasin just now? But overall, if you get a second to really stare at them, they don't have the same head and face structures. They're not as fat, and they're also a lot quicker too. Like, they're moving a lot faster than a cottonmouth usually.
I don't know if a Mississippi green water snake makes it past C tier, especially because I love brown water snakes and they're in C tier. So that's where I would put Mississippi green water snake.
Now, before we continue, let's talk about cottonmouths a little bit more than we have. Cottonmouth and water moccasin are two names for the same snake, and they are not related to water snakes. In fact, their closest relatives are copperheads and cantils, which are both pit vipers just like them. Now, these guys are the only subaquatic pit vipers in the world, and they get both of their names from their behavior. Cottonmouth being the coloration that they have when they open their mouth, and water moccasin for living around water. There are currently 2 water moccasin species here in the US, the northern and the Florida moccasins, and they are certainly the snakes that people tend to hate the most, especially in the southeast. Overall, they are a toxic species, and they're even comparable to some smaller rattlesnake, but they aren't incredibly deadly or even the most venomous snake in the States by any means of the imagination. In fact, most deaths and bites have happened from people trying to kill or collect the snake, followed by them not getting medical treatment. So if you want to be safe, just leave them alone and certainly don't play with them. And if you're ever bitten by a cottonmouth, make sure to get medical treatment. The plainest of the bunch, the plain-bellied water snake can be found all across the eastern US, from the Gulf and Atlantic coasts all the way up the Mississippi River into the Midwest, and even down into Mexico. This is actually the species that I grew up seeing the most. Like every snake after on this list, it mostly eats fish and frogs, and they can be found near any body of water within their range. But I tend to see most of them along really muddy lakes or floodplains. As their name suggests, they have this plain-colored belly, but that can range from tans and yellows to more copper and even this really gorgeous red coloration, which you can mostly see in places like the Carolinas and Georgia. While they both can have this dingy, plain coloration, there are a few ways to tell these guys apart from a cottonmouth. While juvenile plain-bellies tend to have a lot of patterning, the adults have virtually none. They're also a lot less chunky, and they don't have that square, blocky head structure, and they certainly don't have all those markings on the face. While it's true that water snakes will flatten out their heads when disturbed, you can still see that it just doesn't have that wide of a face. What has been your experience with these snakes?
Okay, I personally think that plain-belly or red-belly water snakes are super underrated. Maybe it's just because I'm seeing really pretty ones.
I don't know. I mean, the other Nerodia have pretty good dorsal patternings too. Like,
It doesn't have any dorsal banding because the adults never do. Yeah, and the weird thing about plain-belly water snakes to me is that they seem to care the least about staying by water of any of our Nerodia. Like, people are getting these plain-belly water snakes in their chicken coops all the time.
do we give them points or take off points for that?
So I think that's a cool thing. I actually think that bumps them up in their coolness for me. But compared to other water snakes, it could also be a detractor because it's not very water snakey to pop in someone's chicken coop.
So comparing them to cottonmouths, plain-bellied water snakes in particular, cottonmouths tend to have at least some patterning. If they're solid on top, then they tend to have a little bit on the sides. Plain-bellies just don't have anything.
So I don't think these are as easy to confuse as bandeds, but they're still up there. I can see these being very easily confused with cottonmouths. These uncolored adult Nerodia that get about the same size as cottonmouths and live in pretty much the same places.
While they are like dark and dingy, you can tell them apart from like your cottonmouths a little bit easier, but at the same time, they are a dark colored water snake.
So maybe something like an 8 out of 10 for cottonmouth similarity.
Now, we don't oftentimes think of water snakes as rare or endemic, but we actually have two water snake species that can only be found in the state of Texas. The Brazos River and Concho water snake can only be found in central Texas. These two little water snakes are actually near threatened species. So yes, if you live in their range, they are protected. They're really small. In fact, I like to call them the pygmy water snakes. They both have very similar coloration. IDing these snakes is certainly easier if you're in the location. They're kind of like a banded water snake that has that more club-headed look. For identification, yeah, if you're in their river, just leave the water snakes alone in my opinion. They're very regionally common. If you see a water snake within their range, half the time, it's probably going to be one of them. They're locally abundant, and while they aren't that impressive, they are neat little snakes. But they're also a really cool conservation success story, being as a lot of their river edge habitats have actually been restored specifically for these snakes, which really helps to improve water quality and habitat for a lot of other species. We've not seen these snakes in person before.
Okay, I've never seen, nor may I ever see, either of these snakes, Zach. Concho water snake or the Brazos water snake. Because their distribution is so limited, I just don't ever see myself wanting to specifically target them either. But maybe, hey, I don't know. And here's the thing. I think that if these snakes were not limited in distribution, we might not care so much about them. The conservation status is cool. It's a success story where these species were rapidly going extinct, and we were able to protect some important habitat for them. But beyond that, I just don't see these species as being really unique, even compared to a lot of the other water snakes.
It's cool. They are a pygmy. They're like a smaller, a dwarf water snake species, which I think is cool. And I think the conservation success story is awesome. Besides the fact that we almost killed them and then we didn't, and that's a good thing, and that they're small and only live in one place, I think that's where the coolness factors end. That's it. That's where it ends. Throw the Texas endemics into C tier. Next up, we actually have the largest water snake species in the world, and it's going to be the Florida greens. Found throughout the Florida Peninsula and some parts of South Carolina for some reason, the record-sized water snake is in fact the Florida green, coming to a maximum of 6 feet 2 inches, which is just an absolutely beastly water snake. In all other senses, they're very similar to the Mississippi greens. Big buggy eyes, lots of coastal riverine habitats. But one cool thing about the Florida greens that I've not actually seen with the Mississippi greens is they can be this red-phased coloration. It's a really cool looking snake. Now they are one of the larger water snake species, which means identifying them can be a little bit tricky at a first glance. Once again, head structure and coloration can help, but their body shape is a really good hint as well. Even when they get massive, they still have this lankier build when compared to cottonmouths. Also, the cottonmouths in Florida tend to be a lot less ambiguous with their colors, either having a lot of banding or a really drab coloration, and it's not going to look similar to your Florida greens. So regionally, these snakes are easy to identify. I like Florida greens. They are the largest water snake species, but what are your thoughts on Florida greens?
I've seen one before, and it was one of my favorite water snake encounters ever because they look so ridiculous. Like, even more than the other block-headed snakes that specialize in eating fish, these things have just enormous bug eyes. They look so goofy.
They do have weird little alien bug eyes. Like, they even look bigger than Mississippi greens.
I think you have to bump the Florida green water snake up a tier or two from the other block-headed snakes for those unique characteristics. Now, I haven't seen enough of them to really adequately rate them, but you also get different color phases. Like, you can get red ones, you can get yellowish ones, you get the green ones.
Now let's take a look at one of my personal favorite water snakes. Classic here on the channel, it's the Diamondback water snake, a very large water snake species that can be found in rivers across the central South US, up the Mississippi River, and down all the way into Mexico. These guys are only 3 inches behind the Florida green water snake, so they are quite large, and another name for them is the chain water snake. Sometimes you'll hear me call them chain water snakes because it's a lot less stressful for people to hear chain water snake called out than Diamondback. These snakes are actually so large and well patterned that many people will kill them and call them rattlesnakes, which is odd for sure because there's certainly no rattle there. One of the craziest things I've seen regarding these snakes is their affinity for catching catfish. And sometimes their head is certainly bigger than their stomach. I've seen these guys basking with catfish in their bellies, and the spines, the venomous spines of the catfish are sticking through the snake, which is just crazy. ID-wise, their head structure and clean coloration are certainly the go-tos. They're pretty heavy-bodied and actually surprisingly buoyant as far as water snakes are concerned, similar to brown water snakes in a lot of ways. So instead, try and look at that noggin and that top patterning for that more consistent coloration. I'm really tempted, I'm so tempted to put the Diamondback water into B tier and make it the sole owner of B tier. Okay, let me ask you this, because you actually got your lifer Diamondback with me. What did you feel finding a Diamondback water snake?
It looks kind of like a fancy brown water snake to me. They are a little lighter in color. I feel like they have more interesting patterns. Their eyes tend to be a little bit a brighter coloration. So I thought Diamondback water snakes were really, really cool.
I think they still have the consistencies, but I think it's just a shinier, bigger brown water snake. Like, that's my initial thoughts.
But still like a 6 or a 7 on the Cottonmouth similarity scale.
They're not like the largest water snake, but on average, the experience with a Diamondback is that they're massive catfish-eating, riverine water snakes. They're also a bit prettier than browns. And finally, we have reached the water snake of all water snakes. If you thought that you've seen a cottonmouth in the northern US, this is what you saw. The northern water snake, otherwise known as the common water snake. From what I've seen online, this is probably one of the most observed and publicly posted snake species in the world. And oftentimes people are calling them cottonmouths in the northern US, where there actually aren't any. A larger water snake species that actually does get pretty close to 6 foot. These guys live in every conceivable water body within their range, hence the name common water snake. Although the midland varieties in the south tend to be a little bit more isolated to rivers, or at the very least nearby them. Their blotched coloration and striped facial markings are dead giveaway that you're looking at a northern water snake. And their preferred habitats tend to be more rocky wetland edges. If you can't identify these snakes, first and foremost, check ranges. If you live in Massachusetts, it's this guy. If you live in Michigan, it's gonna be this guy. If you live in Tennessee, it's probably this guy, but certainly still check. And the way you check is by looking for that consistent blotched patterning, and some of the other ID tips we've covered today on head structure and movement. In my opinion, these are some of the most underrated water snakes simply because they're common. I absolutely love these snakes. I'll let you speak first.
Oh my goodness, northern water snakes, finally. This is my childhood water snake. These are the water snakes I grew up with. I've seen way more northern water snakes than any of the other Nerodia, and I love northern waters. They get pretty big, they have an incredibly wide distribution, and there's this huge variation in colors and patterns that you can get among different individuals of northern water snakes.
That can be showcased with the subspecies too, because I didn't realize how many subspecies of these there are that people really like to see. Like, you guys have an endemic y'all have the Carolina water snake, which are really cool. I got to see those for the first time with you many years ago. I didn't realize that Lake Erie water snakes for the longest, I thought they were a Plain-Bellied subspecies, but they were a sipedon. They were a northern water snake subspecies. And then as you kind of come to the south, you get midland water snakes. And they are like, some of them look as good as mole kings. Like, I know people are going to murder me for saying that, but like, they're so pretty. Like, they're red. They're legitimately red. Now, I will say, since these are the most observed snake species in the world, like, this is the one that people are going, I saw cottonmouth, I saw copperhead. Like, this is the most widespread one that gets confused.
I think that in most parts of the range, northern water snakes get confused for copperheads as much, if not more, than they get confused for cottonmouths.
You talk a lot on your channel about copperheads having that Hershey kiss or hourglass patterning. So I guess that's probably the best way to compare to a northern water snake as well. So the thing that they're going to kill us about, I think we stick these bad boys into A tier. I think that the sipedon is A tier. I think it is awesome. I think some of my favorite water snakes I've ever found have been northern or common water snakes. And for our final water snake species, we have what is arguably the most beautiful and unique species on our list, the marsh snake. And rather just tell you about them in here, let me show you out in the field. The Mississippi Delta region of Louisiana, an endless expanse of marshes and black mangroves, where brackish water inlets provide the perfect habitat for these snakes. Here we go. It's probably not going to take off out. I don't like open water, so I lied. He does like open water. This right here is the Gulf Saltmarsh snake. It's probably one of the most unique water snake species that you can encounter. And along the Gulf Coast, they can actually be quite plentiful after a big storm. Now this here is a big female. They actually don't often get too much bigger than this. They tend to be anywhere between 2.5 feet. And this one actually seems like it's had a pretty long and rough life. She's got a big nub tail. She's got some bite marks on her, full of scabs and scars. Living in the salt marsh is actually a very rough business for these guys. As you can imagine, there's not many other snakes that'll actually live out here. There's the occasional speckled king snake living on an oak island. Ribbon snakes will pass through, but for the most part, the salt marsh snakes kind of rule this environment. Now the harshness of the environment is kind of showcased with the reptile diversity. In this kind of habitat, you're really just going to get two very well adapted salt marsh reptiles, and that's going to be the Gulf salt marsh snakes and the Diamondback terrapins, specifically the Mississippi Diamondback terrapins. And the reason that they can both live here is that they're both able to regulate their salt intake, and they're also very good at going long periods of time without fresh water. They're somewhat drought resistant, and that's a very interesting thing to think about with a water snake, a species that's always living its entire life in the water, but obviously they can't drink salt water. A lot of times what they're going to be doing is skimming the rainwater off of the surface or coming out during or after heavy rains to drink. Now for the most part, they're going to be eating fish. There's not a lot of frogs in these environments, the occasional toad, but probably mostly fish. And I'm not even particularly sure what kind. I'd imagine shiners, small mullet, anything that's going to get in these little inland marshes is what I would imagine to be fair game. They move very weird compared to your typical water snake. See that snaking back movement that they do? They're a little bit more limber than your typical water snake species, and a lot of people don't even know that these are a water snake, but these are in fact a Nerodia species, one of the 10 Nerodia species, and what I would consider to be the most well adapted. Now there's actually 3 subspecies of the marsh snake. They used to consider them a full species, but this right here would be the Gulf salt marsh snake, and they tend to have these more straight tan bands and a little bit of a lighter color in this part of the Mississippi River Delta. As you head east of here into the Florida Peninsula, you actually end up with the Atlantic salt marsh snake, and one of my personal favorites, the mangrove salt marshes, which can look like this but a little bit darker in coloration, or they can look a bright red or at least a maroon red coloration. Salt marsh snakes are probably some of my favorite water snake species, and most of the year they're actually very uncommon. You're not going to be seeing a ton of these snakes out. After a heavy rain like what we got last night, occasionally they'll be moving around, but most of them get seen after major tropical storms or after major hurricanes. And that's because they get washed straight out of the marshes, up onto the beaches, up onto people's properties, and that's when people think that these guys are moccasins. But as you can see, that is a very well-striped snake. And another really cool thing about these guys, check out that belly. It's got a bright red belly with that dotted triangle line down the middle, and they can also have a black belly. So usually you're going to see black and red-bellied salt marsh snakes in this area, but around here, I think the red bellies are a little bit more common. Where I'm from, the black bellies are a bit more common. So a little bit of regional variance among these snakes. Wow, and the face on this animal, super unique looking when it comes to the Nerodia. He's got a really cool face. The marsh snakes from this area are some of my favorite looking probably anywhere in the world. They've got a really light coloration, a bit of red on the chin, and then they've got those tans and blacks all over the head. These snakes are absolutely gorgeous. They're perfectly harmless, and they're able to live in one of the harshest environments of any water snake species, and that is why the Gulf salt marsh snake specifically is my favorite water snake. All the marsh snakes, of course, but these ones have a special place in my heart, living in my home state of Louisiana. Ben, what do you have to say about salt marsh snakes?
What do I think about salt marsh snakes? I think I really want to see one. I still have never found a salt marsh snake, and now I've never intensively searched for them, so I don't know if I deserve them. But from what I've seen, these are incredibly unique, very, very special snakes. I think of all the Nerodia, this is one of the few that herpers generally agree is something desirable, like something that you actually want to go and find.
You just have to go after a hurricane, Ben. Don't you understand? They only spawn in after a hurricane, I'm telling you. I remember my earliest experience with marsh snakes was actually volunteering to do hurricane cleanup. Like, this whole beach was just absolutely loaded with trash, and like me and all my friends, we got together and we were just going and cleaning up trash and debris and stuff, and there were so many marsh snakes. I probably saw like 20 that day, not looking. I was like I would just see them go into the water. I'm like, what was that? I was like, that was a really fat ribbon snake. And I went to my little flip book the next day and I was like, oh, it's marsh snakes. I was like, I never see these. I guess I need to go back there. And when I went back, there was like none. I'm like, this is so strange. And like, yeah, whenever they get washed out of the marsh, they are a dime a dozen. And then every other time of year, they're like nigh impossible to find in some areas.
You can get brilliantly colored saltmarsh snakes, really bright yellows, really bright reds that you don't get with other species, and it even exceeds the bright colors that you get with like northern water snakes, for instance.
Yeah, the mangrove marsh snakes are like insane. I specifically went to go find I think it is the only Nerodia on this list that I specifically like went out of my way. I specifically went to a location to find them. So that kind of showcases to me like they are that cool. I think this is one of the snakes people misidentify as cottonmouths, but they are the least of the water snakes, so I would give them anywhere between a 3 and a 4 out of 10.
But yeah, I can agree that saltmarsh snakes would go up in S tier, and I think that they are 1 out of 10, but again, it's a snake, it's by water, so for the general public, probably something more like a 4 or 5 out of 10 for cottonmouth similarity.
It's easy even for seasoned snake hunters to mix them up at times, but repetition and a lack of fear of these snakes is the best way to properly identify them. So I hope this helps some of you appreciate and identify these snakes better when compared to moccasins. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check this one out, where we mapped out every state's most venomous species. If you live in the US, this one's also really helpful to watch. Thank y'all for watching this video, and we will see you guys next time.